There's no place like the Qube.
Hey, I'm Darren.
And I'm Esther, and this is Second Sunday, a podcast about Black queer people finding, keeping, and sometimes losing faith.
What I find a lot with the church is that we prioritize holiness over wholeness. I wanted to be whole, and I was in a space and in a culture that believed that holiness was the only wholeness that you needed.
The voice we just heard was Danyelle Thomas, but some of us know her as Pastor Danny. She already preached the whole word. Esther, let's talk about it. There are so many ways that we compartmentalize our identities to fit in, and it has an effect on our lives. Can you tell us about a time where maybe you felt like you were fully seen and fully known and fully loved?
Ooh, fully seen, fully known, and fully loved. I would say the first time I was in a church that was both predominantly Black and queer friendly. That is a time that I felt fully seen, because all of the familiar things that are comforting to me in a worship space were present. And then this new element of being able to be out and queer felt very comforting and made me feel very seen. So being able to go to church with my partner as a Christian queer couple, just going to church, it seemed so mundane, but it was so radical feeling to me.
Yeah, I feel you on that. And it's interesting that it's also church for you, because for me, it was when I first started working at my fully affirming church. I came in used to having to dance all over the place and word things a certain way and walk on eggshells. And then I realized just on a regular old Sunday that I was common in this church. Everybody had a story like mine. Everybody was navigating things and asking questions. And it was like, oh, this is me. This is me together. I don't have to separate parts of my story. I can just show up. Mm-hmm. It was so affirming and so enriching, but it also reminded me of just how much struggle I was carrying trying to fit into some of the churches I'd been a part of in the past.
Yeah, it's almost like you don't realize all the ways you were holding yourself back until someone's like, you can just be yourself. You know that, right? And you're like, oh, my bad.
Exactly. This season, we're focused on people who are exercising their faith outside of the traditional church. And Danyelle Thomas is doing that through her work as a Black faith and spirituality speaker, author, public theologian, spiritualist, and activist. Her work centers on the intersection of faith and social justice, particularly with regard to issues of race, gender, and sexuality. She is the founder of The Unfit Christian, and her approach is deeply grounded in the Christian tradition and reclamation of African spiritual practices. In today's episode, we're going to join Danyelle on her journey to choose wholeness over holiness while living in our Black bodies.
So I grew up very much deeply in Protestant-rooted ideology and dogma and theology about God, the Bible being inerrant and infallible, most living, most pleasure being defined as sin. All of those things led me to a very restricted life. So I grew up in a sense that you had morning service, you broke, and you might have had, communal dinner, then you're right back into evening service. And then by the time Sunday ends, Tuesday's here, it's time for some kind of rehearsal. And on Wednesday, we're here for Bible study. And on Thursday, it's probably somebody's revival starting. And then we just start the cycle over and over again every week.
Given Danyelle's strict religious upbringing, we wanted to hear how she began to break away from traditional church values. And guess what? It all started by missing one Sunday at church.
I describe it as going through drug withdrawal because no, I've never done heroin, but I've absolutely had an overdose of the Holy Ghost. And that first morning that I did not go was like the cruelest withdrawal. Like I literally had to breathe and talk myself through it to understand that even if I just missed this one Sunday, there was no condemnation there, but to a mind that had been shaped and formed to believe that one does not forsake the assembling of the saints just for any old reason. Like, you need to actually have a good reason to not be at church. To simply decide not to go because you don't want to seemed like the first step over to a reprobate mind. So for me, it was that moment of constant battling within myself about, should I go? Should I not go? Well, okay, it's okay to miss this one time, but maybe it's not. Well, if you go ahead and get up now, you'll only be a little bit late. You can still go. I had to force myself to say, let's just try it. Because I wasn't going because I had this deep desire to be there. I was going because I had been conditioned to be there. I'd already been at a point of impasse with the church. I'd already been a point of questioning what I was doing in my constancy of church attendance. And at that point, I was in undergrad, so I was starting to undo a lot of the theological frameworks I had learned because of the new information I was attaining through my educational experience. So it was real hard to hold on to these ideas about, love the sinner and hate the sin when you start to actually understand the human mind and psychological behavior through psychology courses. It's hard to see, goodness being associated with wealth when you take sociology courses and you start to understand, systems of power and understand that it's not about goodness or being favored by God, but it's about privilege. These are things that I knew and kind of understood by the mere fact of being Black and also other marginalized identities, but they were not things that I had concrete ideological frameworks for until I got to college. So I wasn't sad because I just wanted to be in the fellowship of church. I was fearful of what it meant to disengage this practice for my faith. If not in the sanctuary, where was I going to find God? So that really, truly forced me into this space of, you don't know where you are and you may not know where you're going, but you can figure it out from here.
Having withdrawals from church is wild.
But I felt that thing. We were indoctrinated into this idea of missing church is like missing God altogether. And that part is the unspoken part. It's the unnamed part. I mean, some of us heard it literally said that way. That set us up to be in this internal conflict. Like that really does keep us locked into certain places. And at some point we have to reckon, is this truth? Is this liberating? Is this freedom or nah? What about for you? Was there a time when you missed a Sunday service and you felt a certain way about it?
I feel a way every time I miss church. Even though I haven't gone to church recently, I feel a way every Sunday when I wake up and I'm like, it's really hard, Darren, to miss church.
What's the feeling? What's happening in you when that happens?
The feeling is this is worship and there's a discipline to it. Mm-hmm. That if you only go to church when you feel good, that's not how church works. And then there's a part of my brain that's like, you're supposed to rest and you could have church here if it's that much out of your reach today.
Yeah.
And there's also part of me that's like, God knows how I feel right now, and that's the thing that I rest in. But then there's the discipline of having a practice, praying a certain amount and just going back, because sometimes it feels like if you only do it when it feels like it's doable, then it might never get done. Unfortunately, because of the way that I was raised and how a lot of people were raised, the noise of people's talking really has cluttered up a lot of my own desires and convictions that I could work through on my own. So sometimes I do be staying home. I'm not gonna hold you.
For me, even though I share, in our first episode about having experienced a cult and all this other stuff, the fact that I was in a school that required religious studies, specifically required non-Western religious studies as a part of everybody's education, it exposed me to some other ways of thinking and seeing the divine that had nothing to do with trying to change my beliefs, but was all about me having a broader worldview. What about for you? Were there things or resources or books or videos that helped you maybe see some other perspectives, Esther?
No, it has really only been through conversation. It's really only come from just gradual conversation and interaction with people that just didn't make me feel judged as I worked out what worked for me. Because I think there was maybe a part of my life where I wanted a formula. And the reality that I learned probably around college time was there's no one size fits all salvation. There's no one size fits all regimen for how you connect with God.
Amen to that. And for Danyelle, missing that one Sunday was the beginning of building a new understanding of belonging and belief.
You have to understand, like, not basically being in the building didn't disassociate me from the practices and the culture of Black church. Let me start there. It's like we say all the time, you can take a person out the hood, but you can't take the hood out the person. You could take the girl out the church, but you can take the church out of the girl. So it really kind of became this space of like, well, I'm still fundamentally myself, but I'm not going to church. And at that time, in the beginning, probably about the first year, I kept telling myself, well, I'm just looking for a new church home. So it went from every Sunday attendance to, okay, maybe I'll go try this church, or I'll go and attend this one. Maybe this is a time for me to explore different fellowships. Maybe this will offer me what I'm looking for, which at that point was just really contentment and comfort. I was looking to re-engage the faith that had raised me, the knowledge and the wisdom of the spaces in church that brought me to the places that made and unmade me. So I think for the first year or so, I just kept telling myself I was looking for another church home. It wasn't until, honestly, when I started hitting my core major level classes that I started to consider that there were other practices or additional things and ways of knowing for me. And so my undergrad degree is in Africana Studies. So as you can imagine, I took a broad scope of things and knowledge learning about the diaspora, including religion. So all of these things have happened to my people, my ancestors, and their living descendants, myself included. I know what it's like to live Black in this body in America, and quite frankly, across the world, as somebody who travels internationally frequently, what it means to be Black in different spaces. And yet and still, I'm being told to believe in this God and to love this God and to give my all to this God, who seems not to be interested in intervening on behalf of people who look like me in the political struggles that we have, in the socio-political struggles that we have, the geopolitical struggles that we have. Name a thing, attach it to politics, because the Black identity is a politic. It is a political identity, as is any racial identity. But to experience all that and to begin to know it in such a way made me begin to really question whose God had I given my devotion to all these years. And that honestly is the turning point that sent me into a search for finding a God in whom I could see my whole self. I grew up in a space where God could love the giving part of you, but not the queer part of you. God could love the serving part of you, but not the woman part of you. There was a God that loved you in parts and in pieces. And I didn't want to experience God in that way anymore. So truly kind of being armed with this knowledge didn't send me to an immediate, like, this is the change in practice and this is how I define my faith now. It sent me into the necessary state that must come before any kind of decolonization or deconstruction of religious practices, which is questioning. Just got to start asking some questions. And I gave myself room to ask questions without needing to know the answers, and not in my traditional religious way of, well, God's ways are not our ways, or any other things we do to lie to ourselves. I was going to use a nicer word, but anything else we do to lie to ourselves about what God has or has not said, or what Spirit has or has not said to us. I allowed myself just to not know and to sit with the feeling of not knowing. And then allowing myself that space allowed more opportunity to engage in knowledge sharing, communal building. I've always had diverse friends across all religious backgrounds. So talking to them about their spaces of faith and how they believe, how they practice. I've always included atheism and agnosticism in my conversation partners because I feel like if you could just absolutely go like, I don't think that exists at all. I want to know how you process that as somebody who has never had an opportunity from birth, being a preacher's kid, a kid of a prophet. Like, I ain't never known nothing but God. So how do you have such deep faith that God doesn't exist? And how do you move with life without that anchor? For me, my spiritual practice is a deep anchoring part of my life. So how do you continue to move, it seems, successfully, joyfully, peacefully through life without those beliefs? And I think it's really, truly having those friends that allowed me to be more comfortable with what I don't know and not feeling the need to fill those voids with platitudes that may or may not bring comfort. I'm just okay not knowing. And that is my comfort spot.
There were so many times where we were directly preached at that if you were friends with an atheist, that if you were friends with an agnostic, that you were just busting hell wide open.
It was like those people were portals to hell and the demons were gonna jump through them. Like they would transform into a black hole.
Right. They was gonna put a spirit on you.
Just from having a hoop earring, from their one earring or tattoo, they were gonna become a portal to the afterlife, the dark part.
Right. It was always, they're gonna put a spirit on you. They're gonna lead you astray. It was also weird to me that was the posture we took when we were so much about having the power of God, the authority of God.
I was just about to say we can trample on serpents.
Right? We got all this power.
But not on that belly ring.
Or not on that belief or lack thereof. Right?
Right. It was odd.
It was so weird, but I think it goes back to that idea of how do you maintain control? And that is by not leaving room for questions. For many of us, growing up in spaces that are conservative or fundamental means a space that declares that it has all the answers. It tells us we know what's right, we know what's true, and we pick who's in and we pick who's out. And that the way to be safe and the way to be okay is to not disagree, to not have any difference.
As I began to get older and see people's hypocrisy, as I began to see people as more nuanced, I began to be like, oh, well, maybe these people don't know everything. Because how can you say this and believe this and then act like this? How can you say that you are for this and then condone this or turn a blind eye to this or not protect this person and this and that? And so I was like, well, you're imperfect. There's no way that you know every single thing because you're not even walking the whole walk. You just look like you're walking the walk and nobody can tell you that you're not walking the walk because they're scared. So, it's just like at a certain point in high school, early high school, I started just to be like, it's me and Jesus.
There were two places that really also helped in my own journey with this. One was a group of friends invited me to be in their Black Atheist Facebook group.
Uh-oh.
And
a portal. Darren, you open portals on the World Wide Web.
People actually would inbox me because, sometimes Facebook will show that you're part of a group if it's not a completely secret group. People would inbox me.
Darren, you in this demon group?
Yes. They were like, oh my God, somebody added you to this atheist group and I know you're not like that. I was like, I'm not. And I'm fine. And they were like, well, oh, you in there trying to convert them? No, they're fine where they are too.
Oh, so you just hanging out by the portal like it's a fire or something?
Chilling.
To warm your hands by the gates of hell.
Chilling with my peeps. Hey, y'all. This is Darren Calhoun, and I've got a podcast I think you're going to love. Chutzpah. Wondering what chutzpah is? It's that bold, audacious attitude that says, I'm here, I'm real, and I've got something to say. Hosted by Rabbi Shira Stutman and Hannah Rosen, these two dive into your questions through a Jewish lens. From are thruples kosher to how do you talk to your family about Israel? This pod isn't just for the Jewish community. It's for anyone who keeps it real. Tune in to Chutzpod for real life lived better. Hey friends, we're having a live event with PRX.
And we want you to join us virtually.
The PRX Big Questions Project presents
Making It, a night of big questions.
It's Tuesday, June 11th at 7 p.m. Eastern.
Click the link in the show notes to register today.
Danyelle's new posture of holding space for questions led to a new way of being in community for herself and for those who are around her. Being the daughter of a preacher and a prophet, we wanted to know how her parents handled all of this, especially as it leads to the formation of The Unfit Christian, a blog and digital gathering space.
Here's the thing, the people that mattered didn't care. And the people that mattered actually changed with me. My courage to question, confront, and say maybe this doesn't fit encouraged their ability to do the same. My mother is my greatest witness of it's never too late to redefine your experience of God, because as I pushed, my mama pushed. So I started talking about Unfit Christian as a brand, I guess, in 2014. I launched a blog in 2016, April. My dad passed in January. My dad and I would always kind of have these tete-a-tetes. We would have these conversations and philosophical debates, and he encouraged my questioning. Unlike a lot of churches and a lot of church leaders, my father was not afraid of my questions, which began to reflect my relationship with God. I started to understand a God who was not afraid of my questions either. So having parents who supported me made this journey much easier. Now, I will tell you who began to question me, and it was the folks who I had found in community along the way. So prior to doing Unfit Christian, this, voice of decolonization, deconstruction of faith, I've always been very public and very loud about my faith and my Jesus. I'm a Black Christian. Of course, I'm loud and public about my faith and my Jesus. But prior to that, I was a purity culture girl. That was my vice. I tell everybody that every Christian you meet has some kind of theological dogmatic vice, and mine was purity culture. So I had written a book called Closed Legs Do Get Fed, Navigating Celibacy in Today's World. And honey, the church girls loved me. I was getting invited to all the conferences, and that book literally still sells to this day. I had to take it off digital sale on Amazon because I didn't want people to keep buying it, but the hard copy.
It's a collector's item now. I might have to go find me one.
It's still on Amazon. You can just Google it. It's there. But they really loved me. When I come out with Unfit Christian, the posts that people started to notice that there was a change in my theological approach was my first viral post called Jose Won, We Just Lost, right? And so I unpacked this Madonna whore complex dichotomy in the ways in which we've been taught, all the hoes are winning. That was the conversation at that time. And it's sis, they're winning because they're not uptight about what they're doing with their bodies, and they understand that everything is an exchange. And so they just get the highest value for what they're exchanging. And so they were kind of hanging with me there, but they were starting to question it then. And of course, as I progressively came out more and more, later that same year, I would release a post called The Cult of Heather Lindsay, which I would really attack purity culture at that point. And that's when the girls were like, absolutely not. She's been turned over to a reprobate mind. We're going to pray for her. We're going to pray for her. I will never lie to a person. When you begin this work to unpack and redefine who God is to you and for you, your community is probably going to be the first ones to go. That church home no longer is a home for you, because home is made by collective agreement, not just residency. It's made by communal agreement to what we believe and what we don't believe, which is why some churches can never go visit the other ones, because they don't believe what the other person believes. I'll say it freely. A lot of us were in a cult of not our making per se, but certainly our willing participation. And that willingness came from this constant idea that you don't question God. You don't question the man or woman of God. There's a heavy spirit of anti-intellectualism in the church, or at least in my experience. So questioning becomes very much associated with heresy. There is a point where I finally was called a heretic, and I knew that's when I was doing something right. That's when I knew I had finally fully crossed over. Like the moment I got called a heretic for, I don't even remember what it was for. It was some post I had written, and somebody sent me an email and was like, "You're a heretic and this is heretical." And I was like, "Mama, I made it. I'm doing something right." If I'm making the religious gentry, the religious guard uncomfortable, then I'm doing something right here.
Want to dive into how technology and Black spirituality intersect? Or confront the challenges new tech is creating? Maybe even catch a vision of hope for the future?
Check out Moral Repair, a Black exploration of tech. A podcast about the innovations that make our world and break our societies.
And how we can all heal just a bit. Available on Spotify, Apple, and wherever you listen to podcasts.
I wanted a faith that moved and grew with me, instead of one that I was constantly outgrowing and looking for ways to supplement. So I think it's important that the question you ask, at least me, it gave me an opportunity to start thinking and ruminating as I was answering. But I hope that this conversation, as our listeners are kind of contemplating for themselves, why am I so adamant about this being defined for who I am? Because no matter where I move with my gender or sexual identity, at my core, I'm a liberationist. At my core, I believe in us as a people. My soul is never for sale. That's what I always say. And so what matters in my soul is never up for debate. But I'm not that married to my gender or my sexual identity as the identifiers of who I am at my core. So many ways, the way in which our faith is practiced is a reflection of the lives that we lead. You don't think there's any wiggle room for questioning or deconstruction or unpacking and maybe trying again in your faith, because your day-to-day life is lived that same way. And you believe in the Bible infallibly and with inerrance and literally. So you say, as above, so below. So if it's happening like this in the world, that must mean is how God wants it to happen in heaven. It's why when we describe heaven, the streets are paved with gold and we all got mansions. We all have the trappings of capitalist success. That's what heaven is. Like that. That's where your soul's got to go afterwards, right? So again, these systems are all part of each other. And I don't mean to sound like I have a tinfoil kufi on, but I'm saying that these systems are all intertwined. And sometimes the biggest theft from the people is the theft of our imagination. When you can't dream it, you can't see it, and you can't believe it's possible. I believe that anything I can imagine means that it exists in some realm. It may not exist right now here tangibly, but if I can dream of it, that means it's possible. And I don't want us to sound like an after school special, but I truly do believe that it is possible. And I think that's what we need more than anything else, more than tolerance, more than more resources, more than anything else. We need possibility, because possibility births all the rest of those things.
Today, Unfit Christian is a digital gathering with tens of thousands of people following and seeking a faith community outside of the traditional church. It's happening on Facebook, on Instagram. It's happening inside of a private network. It's happening all over, and Danyelle is leading the way.
I have built digital faith communities now, and I literally find myself being that person who leads and initiates as a writer, as a speaker, as a healer, as an insert title here. I think it reflects that more than this is an exception rather than the norm or the rule. And I'm proud to be exceptional in that way. And I'm glad to be able to give a testimony of hope that you ain't gonna lose everybody. You might lose a lot of people, but you won't lose everybody. And so in this undoing into my becoming, it is scary, to love an institution that has both made and unmade you over time. That journey has been, in a single word, scary, and in a phrase, scary but liberating. And freedom is always aspirational and desirable, but freedom does not ever come without a cost. And so a lot of that cost for me was giving over the fear I had of hell, the fear I had of condemnation, the fear I had of separatism from community, into realizing that there are possibilities in a world where I can enjoy God, not as something that I feared, not as something that had the ability to destroy my life at a whim, but a real true relationship to and with God, an experience of God that sees the whole of me. That's what it has felt like over these last years, moving into this space.
I love that she named fear here, and that fear of losing people. I think that's the thing that has a very valid, often, grip on us when it comes to the thought of moving into a different space, whether that space be embracing our own sexual identity or our gender identity and expression. Maybe that space is moving into a different faith practice or a different spiritual belief, or leaving that all together.
You know, what really resonated the most with me from this conversation are two things. One, how real man-made fear can be. Like how tangible and intense you can feel about something just based off what another person has told you and what has been ingrained into your mind about right and wrong that could have absolutely nothing to do with what you are supposed to be in church doing. So yeah, the fact that Danyelle made a community where people feel safe to explore in that way, I think that you don't get there unless you go on your own journey, because what you need might also be what somebody else needs. But it takes bravery to step out there and try to even figure out what could work. And God is everywhere. That's the thing. Like if this is about Christianity, there is no place that we can create that God is not present before you even get there. So this idea that we have to only experience spirituality and our faith in this rigid structure is in itself kind of insulting to God.
One of my favorite scriptures. There's nothing that can separate us from the love of God
at all.
And it goes into that whole list of height, depth, angel, principality, creature, powers, things present,
belly piercing,
tattoos, things to come, things in the past. Nothing can separate us. And there really is hope. There is an expected future. There is something that works out for us. As we close out this episode, I want to invite you who are listening, if you want to find out more about what Danyelle is doing, check out unfitchristian.com, or keep an eye out for her upcoming book titled The Day God Saw Me as Black, The Journey to Liberated Faith, which releases September 24th of this year. Overall, we are here on this journey. So we also would love to hear from you. Be sure to hop on our social media. Let us know what's on your mind. We love the conversation. We love your questions. We love your doubts. And we love you. So join us next time.
One more thing. Can y'all please take our survey? We know you're out there and you're listening. So if you can hear the sound of my voice, please take our survey, because we want to hear from you. We want to know more about how we can better serve you, who you are, and what type of content that you want to hear. So check out our survey at the link in the description. The Second Sunday podcast is hosted by Esther and Darren Calhoun. But podcasting is a team sport, so a big thank you to our dream team.
Our producers, Esther Ikoro, Anna DeShawn, and Nichole Hill. Our associate producer, Amber Walker.
Our sound designer, Florence Adams, and our managing producers, Jocelyn Gonzales and Courtney Fleurantin.
Our opening theme song is Maya B's original track titled They Don't Know. You should download the full song today.
To learn more about today's guests or the show, visit our show notes on our website, secondsundaypod.com, and on Instagram at Second Sunday Pod. Second Sunday is a production of The Qube, spelled with a Q, in partnership with the PRX Big Questions Project, which is generously supported by the John Templeton Foundation and produced by PRX Productions.
The Qube is your #1 curated platform to discover the best BIPOC and QTPOC podcasts.
Support this show and more like it by joining the Qube app and follow the Qube across social media at the Qube app.
Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next episode.
From PRX.